August 1943. A Luftwaffe fighter ace walks into Hermann Göring's office with intelligence that could change the entire air war over Europe. The news: American long-range fighters are escorting bombers deep into German territory. Göring's response? He calls it impossible. Then he accuses the pilot of cowardice. That pilot was Adolf Galland, one of Germany's most decorated aces with 104 confirmed kills. And Göring's refusal to believe him would cost the Luftwaffe everything. This is the story of a warning ignored, an ego unchecked, and the moment the Luftwaffe began its irreversible descent into defeat. By the summer of 1943, the air war over Europe had reached a tipping point. American B-17 flying fortresses were hammering German industrial targets by day, while the RAF bombed by night. The Luftwaffe was bleeding pilots faster than they could train replacements. Adolf Galland wasn't just any fighter pilot. At 31 years old, he was the general of the fighter arm, the youngest general in the Wehrmacht, and a tactical genius who'd flown combat missions since the Spanish Civil War. His job was to coordinate Germany's entire fighter defense. And he was watching it crumble. The problem was range. American bombers were reaching deeper into Germany, but their escorts, mostly P-47 Thunderbolts, had to turn back after crossing into German airspace. This left a gap, a window of vulnerability where Luftwaffe fighters could savage the bomber formations. German pilots called it the happy hunting time, but in August 1943, something changed. Galland's pilots started reporting encounters with twin-engine American fighters over the Ruhr Valley, Germany's industrial heartland. These weren't supposed to be there. The planes were Lockheed P-38 Lightning sleek, twin-boomed interceptors with drop tanks that extended their range far beyond what German intelligence believed possible. The reports were consistent, detailed, urgent. American fighters were now protecting bombers all the way to the target and back. The hunting time was over. Galland knew exactly what this meant. Without that gap, without those vulnerable minutes when bombers flew unescorted, the Luftwaffe's defensive strategy collapsed. He needed more fighters, better tactics, and immediate action. So he did what any responsible commander would do. He took the intelligence to Hermann Göring. Hermann Göring was many things: morphine addict, art thief, Hitler's designated successor. What he wasn't, by 1943, was a competent military leader. Once a decorated World War I fighter ace himself, Göring had grown into a caricature of excess. Weighing over 300 pounds, dripping in medals and stolen jewelry, he spent more time hunting on his vast estate than managing the air force he commanded. He surrounded himself with yes-men and refused to hear bad news. When Galland entered his office with reports of long-range American fighters, Göring's reaction was immediate and dismissive. "Impossible," he said. "The Americans don't have the range. Your pilots are seeing things." Galland pressed. He had multiple reports, consistent sightings, combat assessments. The P-38s were real, they were here, and they were changing everything. Göring's face reddened. "You have to understand the dynamic here." Göring wasn't just Galland's superior. He was a man whose ego had become pathologically fragile. He couldn't admit the Luftwaffe was failing under his command. He couldn't face the fact that American technology and production had surpassed Germany's. So instead, he attacked. "What kind of fighters were they?" Göring demanded. "P-38 Lightnings with drop tanks," Galland replied. "And what did you do about it?" The question was a trap. Göring knew Galland, Me-109s and FW-190s were outmatched by the high-altitude performance of the P-38s and the sheer numbers of American aircraft. But he didn't care about context. He wanted a scapegoat. When Galland tried to explain the tactical situation, Göring cut him off. Then came the accusation that would define their relationship going forward. "Perhaps, Herr General, you and your pilots are simply afraid." The insult hung in the air like smoke. Here was Germany's most decorated living ace being called a coward by a man who hadn't flown combat in 25 years. Galland said nothing. What could he say? Göring wasn't interested in facts. He was interested in preserving his delusion that Germany was still winning. Göring's denial didn't change reality. Through September and October 1943, American escort fighters pushed deeper into German territory. The P-38s were joined by P-51 Mustangs, arguably the finest fighter plane of the war, with the range to escort bombers all the way to Berlin and back. The Luftwaffe's kill rates plummeted. Bomber formations that once lost 10 to 15% of their aircraft to fighters now arrived over targets virtually untouched. Meanwhile, German fighter losses skyrocketed. Experienced pilots were dying faster than replacements could learn to fly. Galland watched his command disintegrate. He pleaded for more resources, better coordination with ground defenses, permission to develop new tactics. Göring ignored him, sometimes for weeks at a time. By December 1943, the strategic situation was terminal. The Allies had air superiority over Western Europe. German pilots, once the most feared in the world, were now flying suicide missions against overwhelming numbers. Training time for new pilots had been cut from years to months, then to weeks. The warning Galland delivered in August could have bought time. Better intelligence might have led to earlier deployment of jets, reorganization of fighter units, or at minimum, a realistic assessment of Germany's strategic position. Instead, Göring's ego sealed the Luftwaffe's fate. Adolf Galland survived the war. He was eventually relieved of his command after continued clashes with Göring, but flew combat missions until the very end, leading an elite jet fighter unit in the war's final months. Hermann Göring was captured by Allied forces, tried at Nuremberg, and sentenced to death. He committed suicide the night before his execution. But this story isn't really about two men. It's about what happens when leaders choose comfortable lies over uncomfortable truths. Galland brought his commander actionable intelligence at a moment when the war could still be influenced. Not won, perhaps, but influenced. Göring's response, driven by pride, delusion, and fear of appearing weak, turned a critical warning into a personal insult. How many times in history has this same scene played out? A subordinate brings bad news. A leader, unable to process failure, shoots the messenger. The organization suffers. The mission fails. The P-38s over the Ruhr Valley in August 1943 weren't just aircraft. They were a signal that the air war had fundamentally changed. Galland read that signal correctly. Göring refused to read it at all. And in that refusal, in that single word, impossible, spoken with absolute certainty about something that was already happening, the Luftwaffe lost the war. Sometimes the most dangerous word in any language isn't a threat or an insult. It's the word a leader uses to dismiss reality because reality has become too difficult to face. That word is impossible.